All right. It's the Oracle within Oracle around account-based motions, Kelvin Gee, and we'll give a more formal introduction, but super excited. He's joining us early morning to join us on the Account-Based Fridays. And as you know, every week we open up with a poll. This week we asked a question around the XDR and SDR function and how they should be kind of either split or not split or grouped. And obviously, this would vary a lot by company size. I'm sure Kelvin will have a point of view on this given the size of his company. But the reason this question came up, we were working in a smaller SaaS company, and they were struggling with how to have the reporting function. Where does it sit, marketing or sales? And then the secondary question was who to follow up and why. The reason I voted kind of split the functions, I find from a career path perspective, it's a little bit cleaner, and sometimes the inbound qualification is a little bit more, it's just a different motion than an outbound function. So it sometimes requires slightly different skill sets. But I don't know, Megan, do you have a point of view on this?
Yeah, I'm not surprised that it's almost evenly split, right? I'm a little all right. So not surprised that we've got a little bit of a split vote here, because I do think that companies handle it both ways. I agree with you about the career path opportunity to go from inbound to outbound. Inbound tends to be a little bit of a lighter lift, but I think the other issue that I've seen come up in some places is if you've got a huge volume of inbound or sufficient volume of inbound to keep the people that you've got on the team busy enough, they're not going to do the outbound, right? They're not going to, well, because you've got to follow up on the inbound quickly, right? We know that if the faster you follow up, the better your odds of getting somebody to convert to whatever it is you want them to convert to. But the other thing is a lot of people do outbound's hard, right? Outbound's really, really hard. It's probably one of the hardest jobs in any company. So if you've got sufficient inbound to prevent you from having to do all that cold calling, I don't blame people for making that choice. I really don't, especially if it's equally rewarded to do one or the other, right? Even though the level of effort is not equal. So I think by splitting it, you do make sure that you've got, sort of that inbound covered and that you're getting the volume there that you need. But then the other thing is, but you also don't, the outbound people definitely, tend to kind of burn out and need other work that they can do or quickly get, and the best of them typically get hired into other sales roles. So can make an argument for having a blend there too, but there's a downside. So anyhow, I don't think there's any conclusive outcome here, but Kelvin, I would love for you to talk with us. And Kelvin, John and I have both known Kelvin for, oh my gosh, more than a decade. And we're delighted to have him here. Kelvin, you are a multiple award winner for your account-based work, really early adopter of it. And I think someone who's really shown many people in the B2B revenue community sort of what really good ABM can look like and what it can deliver. But on top of that, you've been at Oracle for a long time, and making change in a really large organization is super hard. So I'm excited because Kelvin is now the head of strategic customer marketing. And in particular, he's got a central project team or a center of excellence that he's leading within Oracle, which I think can be a really great and impactful model for many organizations. So I'm just super excited that you're here with us to share your wisdom. And then also in particular to talk a little bit about centers of excellence, change management, and really, how do you showcase the impact of ABM? But let's lead off. Tell us about your center of excellence. Tell us about your role. What do you do?
Yeah, hi, Megan. Hey, John. Happy to be here and join you guys on a Friday. And yeah, I think we've known each other, I don't know, for many moons. I think I knew you when you joined Serious Decisions. You were employee number 9, I believe.
12.
12, close.
Yeah. And I think you were a client before I was there.
I was a client
and
before
John
you even
too.
joined. So that that shows how long we go back. And then John and I, of course, we've been conference buddies, BC before COVID. So it's always good to rap with you guys and wax poetic, all things account-based. But yeah, so my role here at Oracle is head of strategic client marketing, central programs team, which is another fancy title for meeting center of excellence. So my role is to help standardize on how we go to market with our account-based approach here at Oracle, specifically for our strategic clients, which represents a huge majority of our revenue. So we only have 230 some odd strategic clients out of 400,000 customers at Oracle. So that's half of 1% of our install base, yet it represents over 20% of our revenue. So to say all of our customers are created equal is clearly not the case here. So these are highly strategic customers. And so our approach with the central programs team is to develop a consistent framework and approach in how we go to market. And that means curating the set of content, a consistent approach in terms of our global one-to-few campaigns, a consistent way of how we measure ourselves, and also a consistent MarTech stack in terms of how we utilize MarTech consistently from region to region. And so it's really centered around how do we do account-based at scale? How do we do personalization at scale? Because everyone knows how to do one-to-one, but very few organizations have done one-to-few and scaled it successfully. And so that's kind of our charter.
I'd be curious on some of the lessons learned there, because it almost sounds like you're an account-based enabler, or maybe your strategic client enabler are the words that you guys might use, which for a lot of companies, that would be a huge luxury to have that kind of opportunity to scale and grow. What have you seen, or what have you learned as part of that process of kind of the one-to-few motion, maybe differently from the one-to-one, or maybe even one-to-many, if that's something that you've seen before?
Yeah, like I said, very few organizations I've seen have done it successfully, right? So yeah, there's really 4 different approaches when you think about a center of excellence. There's kind of the centralized ABM approach, which is really where the center of excellence, and I fully acknowledge that not every organization has the luxury of building a central programs team or center of excellence. But if you're able to do so, there's really kind of 4 different approaches. That the centralized approach, really where the center of excellence does everything, right? In terms of the account selection, the go-to-market strategy, the execution, and then of course the measurement. The second model is really like a centrally driven account-based approach where, again, the center of excellence does most of the heavy lifting, but then the field marketing or regional teams do the execution. And then the third approach is a centrally enabled approach, which is the term you use, John, this is really the model that I subscribe to, which is how do we enable the regions and field marketing to be successful? So we might help with, for example, the process for account selection using a data-driven approach, but maybe it's the regions who actually do the selection. And maybe we recommend a measurement framework or a go-to-market model, but it's really the regions who actually execute it. And in terms of the measurement, they're the ones who maybe actually are running the dashboards, even though we build the consistent dashboard and framework. And then that's the enablement piece also requires training, right? So it implies marketing enablement and training of the regions so that we're all approaching one-to-one and one-to-few the same way. The last approach is really the decentralized model, which really means that there is no center of excellence. And that is, you just acknowledge the fact that the regions are going to give up some efficiencies, and they're going to acknowledge that there's going to be a lot of reinvention of the wheel, a lot of content recreation. But because their go-to-market strategies or their customers are so unique, for example, public sector, where every organization is different, and so you sacrifice that efficiency for the sake of personalization. So those are kind of the 4 different models, but in terms of what's working, yeah, I do believe that having a centralized approach is really important because, Oracle, we've been doing account-based for 10 years now, and we've been doing it at a high level, but always on a one-to-one basis. And bespoke campaigns are great, right? Because they're personalized. And because they're personalized, they're relevant. But that stuff doesn't scale. So again, you get that content reinvention from region to region. You don't get the learnings. You create messaging that has to get reinvented all over again. And so what we're starting to see is traction, because now the regions don't have to do as much heavy lifting, right? They can leverage what we offer, which is these one to few global campaign kits, and have 80% of their offerings delivered to them on a silver platter, so to speak. It doesn't mean that they don't stop doing one-to-one. They integrate or they localize and they personalize the campaigns that we serve up, and then take it to the customer, help it land with the customer. So that's kind of what we're starting to see be pretty impactful.
Kelvin, how do you avoid the sort of age-old challenge of the region saying, this isn't helpful, thanks for sending us campaigns we can't use because nobody cares about this stuff in my region or my country? How do you overcome that, or how do you bring them into the planning process?
Yeah, that's a great question, Megan. A lot of it has to do with alignment, right? And so before you start building your first campaign, you have to make sure every region is aligned. So it requires a lot of calls, a lot of planning up front to make sure that if you build it, they will use it. Because the worst thing you can do is spend a lot of time spinning your wheels and building these things and no one's using it, right? So you align with the themes, the campaigns that make sense. You may not get hand raisers for every region, right? But if you get 3 out of the 4 or whatever, then you have alignment. Well, what you don't want to get into is creating these one-off campaigns that only one region uses and then the other regions don't. So you have to get consensus on a majority of what you're trying to build. And it also has to align with the top in terms of what the company is trying to accomplish. So we have these concepts of winning streak campaigns where if we close one deal with a large customer, we want to have a similar conversation with other customers. And they're built around themes of what the customer needs. And typically it's by vertical, it's typically by use case. And so we build these winning streak campaigns, and then we get alignment from all the regions to run and execute on those. And it's aligned all the way from the top of the organization in terms of what our sales leader wants, all the way down to what the regions want to execute, what makes sense for them.
Yeah, very cool. And I see we've got a question from Linda. I think you covered it a bit, but Linda, maybe you were asking about account personalization at scale and sort of how that's defined. Anything you want to add to your question?
No, it almost seems like an oxymoron, when it's personalization, but you're saying at scale. So I'm curious what that really constitutes in your mind, Kelvin.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, personalization at scale is it means a lot of different things, right? So personalization, the way you probably think about it, how most people think about it is, I know you like to run, and so I'm gonna speak to you in terms of your personal interests, right? So maybe I send you a dimensional mailer with a pair of Nike running shoes, right? So that's highly personalization, right? High degree, and not to say that we're not going to continue to do that. That stuff works, but again, it doesn't scale. So when you talk about personalization scale, now you have to elevate it to company and industry issues, because say if you're targeting a bank and the bank has to deal with some certain things like compliance and data security, well, pretty good chance that even though a bank in Australia has different bylaws and compliance issues in Australia than, say, a bank in the US, chances are that the themes are still pretty much the same, right? They're still dealing with similar issues. So now you can actually personalize by the actual issues that the banks are facing, whether it's the digital transformation or whatnot. Now you're starting to speak to them, but speak to them at a level that they all can understand. So that's what I mean by personalization at scale. There's also some cheats in terms of actual tactics that you can do now. Instead of the personalized a pair of Nike running shoes, now you can do things like an analyst report, where you can actually put a sticky note on it, for example, handwritten sticky note. So it's not, the report isn't personalized for the individual, but the note might be. So things like that, and you can do that digitally, of course, with COVID. So we use a platform called Follows that allows reps to send emails to their contacts, write a personalized note, but the content and authors are all the same across the board. So that's what I mean by personalization at scale.
And does that translate onto your website too? Are you trying to sort of welcome or personalize through chat or something?
Yeah, so again, so Oracle.com is still the centerpiece of what we do digitally, but from a campaign standpoint, again, the campaign, the platform we use is Follows that allows us to build microsites or content boards that are really specific towards the winning streak campaigns we talked about. So they can be done on a one-to-one basis per account, but they also can be done on a one-to-few basis based on the industry. So again, all of our content on these boards are highly selected and highly curated for that particular account or industry. And so again, we drive all of our activity to the boards. So again, we can manage the customer experience that way. And then when we talk about personalization at scale, then when the emails go out from the sales reps, which marketing writes, by the way, they just kind of edit it down and personalize it as necessary. All that activity goes straight to the microsite or content board.
Question for you around kind of the enablement side. And you were talking a few minutes ago about you're working with the sales team and almost enabling them, and you've got the MarTech responsibility. Thinking about a lot of challenges our clients face right now in pulling off account-based strategies or client support or client engagement, there's almost like two distinct functions of a marketing enablement role and a sales enablement role. And typically we see a lot of weakness around the sales enablement role. And quite frankly, weakness because it's a real challenge. You're trying to train reps up that are maybe not savvy at the technology, don't have a lot of time to invest in this, and yet they need to be enabled on how to synthesize a lot of information very quickly. I guess my question is, where do you pick up and where do you leave off with sales enablement, if that's a function within Oracle, like as you're interfacing with that team on the sales side of things?
Yeah, so great question, John. And I'm glad you brought up the topic of enablement, because there's two types of enablement, right? There's the sales enablement and then there's the marketing enablement. Obviously, most companies invest heavily on the sales enablement side, not enough on the marketing enablement side. Both, in my opinion, are equally important. But yeah, sales enablement is super important because in certain regions or where we haven't provided enough coverage historically, we're kind of starting from scratch. And it's definitely the crawl, walk, run approach where we have to teach sales the importance of marketing and we can play. And we're starting to give them slivers of knowledge, like educating them on what predictive intelligence is, right? What is intent data? How to leverage it once we start feeding them that. So a little bit of knowledge there, and then get them smarter on things like social selling, right? So a lot of our sales directors may not have been as active socially. So that's something that we need to correct. So doing things like LinkedIn makeovers and getting them to start to post content on their network, converting their profiles from resumes to business cards, right? So those are little slivers we're starting to invest in. And then the Follows platform, sales plays a critical role in using the platform, because if we build these microsites and provide air cover, they need to be the ones who send out the emails, and the orchestration piece, which is part of our account-based strategy, is important, right? So how do we orchestrate? If we send direct mail, how do they know about it? And then when do they do the follow-up? What's the touch pattern there? So those are things that we think about. And then of course, the MarTech piece is how do we integrate more MarTech into them? So things like, we looked at things like Boardroom Insiders or Databook in terms of that personalization, arming them with insights around the account or the contact that allows them to do some personalization.
Makes a ton of sense. And, Chris brings up a great question down here about measurement. I don't know, Chris, if you're in a position where you can add to this or not, but the question was, how are you looking at the measurement of your account-based success? And, secondary question, knowing that you own Eloqua. If you have an additional platform, or if you've considered a platform, or perhaps you're using your own BI tool to do a lot of that measurement, be very, very curious. And we're going to talk a lot about measurement next week too, incidentally. So Chris, join us next week if this is a keen topic. But Kelvin, how are you measuring success right now?
Yeah, there's measurement is a topic. Yeah, like you said, it's been a whole call on, right? It's always a big question. My philosophy on measurement is really actually simplistic, right? When you boil it down, yes, there's like 23,000 probably KPIs or metrics that you can use to measure account base, right? Everything from the foundational thing, like the number of contacts, how many new contacts you developed, all the way to actually business impact things about, customer life cycle or wallet share or whatever, or NPS. But my approach about account base is really simplistic. Are you building engagement? Are you increasing engagement at the account level? Because that's an early warning sign whether or not you're actually earning your paycheck or not, right? Because if your campaigns aren't landing and it's not increasing engagement, that's probably a sign that it's not working. The messaging is off, the execution's flawed, whatever it is. So always look at an account engagement, because frankly, at the end of the day, that's what marketing's good at. That's what we're hired to do, is to increase engagement. So again, if you're falling down on that, it's probably indication something's wrong. So look at your account engagement, have a score, have an index. Here at Oracle, we use something called a topic score. An account topic score is our proxy as an account engagement score. So we use that to measure engagement. But ultimately, engagement leads to pipeline, which is growth or progression of, right? So again, it depends on your organization and how you measure and what you're chartered with. Either the creation of that pipeline or the progression of that pipeline, or combination of both, is really what sales cares about, right? And so again, you have to look at pipeline from that respect. I will also say, though, that for us, account base is more of a holistic approach as well. So we just don't look at the buy side of the infinity loop, we look at the own side as well. So it's about referenceability. We have a goal of having 100% of our strategic clients be referenceable in a few years. So account base is really great at a number of things. If you think about it, it's changing perception of your brand, increasing your footprint at the organization, building or progressing pipeline. And then the final one really is to increase advocacy. So if you look at it from a holistic lens, buy side versus own side of the infinity loop, and measure accordingly, right? So engagement and pipeline on one side, and then advocacy on the other. And I think that's really what we should be focused on.
I love the advocacy piece of that, Kelvin, because I think that's often overlooked. But if you can get your largest strategic customers to speak, positively about your brand, and their relationship with your brand, I mean, that's almost worth more than the lifetime value of that customer. It adds to the lifetime value of that customer. And, it's not revenue per se, but it's really, really meaningful. So I was excited to hear you kind of add that to the list of things that account-based is really good at, and then also is measured on. Question for you on the pipeline piece of that. Very often the expectation is that account-based should be sourcing pipeline. What do you find in terms of the expectations for your team to be able to say, we added this much pipeline, or we added this many leads? Are you forced to do that? Is that something you have to do, or can you get around it in another way?
That is a great question, Megan. So again, it kind of depends on the organization, the size of the organization, right? So if you're a small startup or mid-sized company, then creation of pipeline is probably a legitimate goal. But remember, these are very large organizations that we are hunting. These are large elephants, right? The biggest of the big. And so pipeline creation isn't something that we are focused on. For us, it's more about influence and progression, right? Because these are global enterprises around the world, right? And so to say that we create an MQL for Disney, right, or Wells Fargo, whatever. I mean, who cares at the end of the day? It's all about influence and progression for us. And so it is a conversation, though, that we're having with senior management in terms of how how do we move the needle from the traditional way we look at measurement? So now we're looking at measurement in a different way, having different conversations. So things like high value engagement, right? In terms of, because at the end of the day, we're trying to create conversations, right? Either net new one or progressing those conversations for sales. And so looking at things at high value engagement. When you have someone like a C-level having a conversation with it, that is a different conversation than, say, a low-level contact, right? So you need to measure that a little bit differently. The other way we're looking at, again, I talked about the importance of engagement and account engagement, is measuring a set of managed accounts against a set of unmanaged accounts. So all things being equal, because you can't cover all of your accounts at any given time. So you're probably going to have a set of unmanaged accounts at any given time. So measure that against the accounts that you are managing, that you are actively campaigning against. And if you're doing your job right, you should see a higher engagement score over the managed accounts versus the unmanaged accounts. And so that should be a litmus test for you to your management that you're earning your paycheck, right? So that's one way we're looking as a control group versus a managed group. And that also applies to the pipeline side. So again, look at your pipeline, your average pipeline for a managed account versus an unmanaged account. Again, if you're doing your job, your pipeline should be bigger than your control account on average.
And I would
That
imagine
makes-
that you would see engaged accounts probably correlate with advocacy.
You would think, yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing that?
Yeah, I mean, well, early days, right? Because that's a longer tail, right? But certainly on the pipeline side, on the left-hand side, that's true, right? And you think about it, it makes sense, right? Companies just don't buy stuff overnight. They actually have to engage with an account. We're talking about, 6-figure deals, if not more, right? So people just don't wake up every morning and just, sign checks of that size without engaging with an account. And so, again, that's why account engagement is really an important litmus test.
So I know we're coming up on time, but I want to make sure we cover a topic that I think is really important here, which is change management. And I think what you've been speaking about around measurement and the credibility that measurement helps to give to an account-based team is a great cornerstone. But what are some other suggestions you have for people who are trying to introduce or expand account-based programs in their company?
Yeah, great question, Megan. Every time I talk to people in our industry, our peers, there's always a great use case to go account-based, or to run a pilot, right? Yeah. And so again, you want to find and identify those people within those organizations that have the intent and interest to do something different, to move away from traditional demand gen. Again, great use cases if you have a defined universe of accounts, right? And you have someone who's willing to try something different. And so you want to work with that person, enable them with all the right tools, share the MarTech, share consistent best practices and approach, the strategic framework, for example, and help them become successful. And that's kind of what my team is focused on, is making sure every team within Oracle who is interested in doing account-based, not just the strategic clients, which is my day job, but helping other teams within Oracle who have been interested in account-based become successful. So it's all about the pilots and making those pilots shine. And part of the success of the pilot is, other than figuring out the right KPIs and the yardsticks and how you measure yourself, is choose your pilots wisely, right? Serious decisions have the term, which I love, which I keep pushing out, is the cooperation index, which I find to be true, right? When you choose your pilot, make sure you choose your sales counterpart who you have a strong cooperation index with, right? Don't choose someone who hates you, and don't choose someone who doesn't believe in marketing, right? So it may not be the salesperson who owns the most strategic accounts, but I will say that if you choose someone with a strong cooperation index, chances are you're going to be much more successful.
That's a terrific point on the piloting. Gosh, that's the whole session right there, because you're right. If you're not hitting those success metrics, people are really going to start questioning, well, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Right. And you need word of mouth to kind of carry forward. So
Yeah, exactly.
you're right. Really paying attention to that probably pays off in spades.
Yeah. And then assuming that the pilot goes off without a hitch and shines, then we have to do some internal marketing, right? Marketing to marketers, right? And shine a spotlight on it and say, hey, look at this campaign. Look how it worked. Look how it performed. We need to do more of this. And that's kind of how you start a revolution.
Agreed. And we've got one last question. If people don't mind going over just a minute, Kelvin, because I think this is a great question. And since you're working with strategic accounts where you are supporting the senior most relationships in those accounts, you're a great person to ask. From Chris and Steve, looking to get some suggestions on engagement with C-levels, kind of getting into accounts at the C-level. Any thoughts on that, or any tactics that you all are using? I know it's not one size fits all, but any particular things that you're seeing C-level contacts respond to?
Yeah, it's another good question. I mean, historically, we ran into the same thing with our accounts, where because Oracle started, in the database business, right? We've got strong relationships with the IT side of the house, but not so much with the line of business. So how do you build out those relationships? One of the foundational elements, though, before you start your campaign, is when you're talking about KPIs, is do you have the requisite number of contacts at the account? Because at the end of the day, if you don't have those contacts, you can't market to them. It's pretty fundamental, right? So make sure you know who these people are, regardless of the strength of the relationship, but know who they are. Invest in certain tools to get to develop those contacts, but also the insights into those contacts. And then run your campaigns to get those C-levels to raise your hand. And some of the portfolio items might be things that we all know well and love, but may not be typically associated with an account-based program. So make sure you use your whole portfolio that's made available to you. So things like your CVC center, your EBC centers, right? Sports hospitality, if you have such things, or executive programs, roundtables, forums. So you want to create an event or something like that that's of interest to that C-level that will get them to raise their hand, right? So moderated by a third party, for example, a high-level engagement event, wine tasting, whatever it is, poker tournament, whatever it is that might engage that type of audience. Make sure you incorporate that into your whole portfolio.
Excellent. Great feedback. And just looking at time here, we got to have you come back, Kelvin. Just so much content, so much valuable content, and really wanted to thank you for investing the time early morning there to share your insights. I don't know, Megan, any closing thoughts or anything from your side?
Just a big thank you for joining us today, Kelvin. And I totally agree. We need to invite you back. And thank you. You've given, I think, some really good and practical suggestions and perspectives on how people can make their programs successful, and some good suggestions on the kinds of activities that might help them as well. So thank you very, very much for that. And thank you, everybody, for joining us as well and for your great questions. This has been a really good session. And we'll look forward to next week's with Latney from 6 Sense. So she'll have some great insights